while I try and navigate not being able to hear. Maybe we'll be able to sort that out. But thank you for having me. If it's not COVID that's keeping us away from face-to-face, it's a natural disaster. So here I am calling in from right in the thick of it in Oxley in Brisbane. It's been a dire few days, and I guess, yeah, I can just ask you to bear with me because we've been sort of dealing with lots of neighbours around us who've been impacted again for the second time in the space of 11 years, and also got some loved ones down there in Lismore. So got thoughts all over the place today, but it's a very important time to be talking about what the red meat industry are doing to try and reduce our impacts on the environment, so that we try and reduce the likelihood that we'll keep seeing increased frequency and increased severity of some of these natural disaster scenarios. So my name's Margaret Jewell, and I'll be talking with you today about the Carbon Neutral by 2030 or CN30 initiative. First, I'll just give a quick description of CN30 and then go through some of the rewards of being involved and some of the progress that we've made to date. Then I'll talk you through the roadmap, and I'll finish with some discussion around how producers can get involved. So firstly, CN30 is a target for the Australian red meat industry to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. It's also a coordinated research, development and adoption effort, and MLA's role is to support RD&A into technologies and practices that producer and all other stakeholders can adopt, so that we can make the transition to a lower carbon future. We're not doing this alone, so MLA are working extensively with the government, state government departments and other research organisations to bring these technologies and practices to market. Progress towards CN30 is measured and reported by the National Greenhouse Gas Inventory Accounts, and that's kept at arm's length to MLA and industry. And it's important to note that we've got the main three greenhouse gases that are related to our industry are carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide and methane. And we're never going to get to a position where we don't have any emissions. So we are going to have to be able to store carbon in the landscapes within our own production zones and use that to offset the emissions that are attributed to our industry. So there's a number of reasons that led to industry making the decision to embark on the CN30 target. Firstly, we wanted to maintain consumer and community support and market access. And we're increasingly seeing that consumers are wanting to see evidence of environmental stewardship credentials as part of the products that they purchase. We're also wanting to make sure we can continue to access capital, and we're already seeing that some of the big banks are asking for that evidence of environmental stewardship in return for access to capital. And they're also offering discounts on loans for people that can demonstrate emissions reductions or other aspects of providing ecosystem services. We also think that by being on the front foot and demonstrating that we're taking action, that there'll be a reduced need for governments and regulators to come along and force the red meat industry to make changes before we might be ready to do so. And very importantly, we want to make sure we can continue to produce a really high quality product in the face of what's going to be some challenging environmental conditions. And as I've said, we've seen some of those this week. All of the activities that we're supporting as part of MLA are, we consider them to be win-win activities. So we've got the red meat industry strategic plan, which has a vision to double the value of red meat sales by 2030 and to do so as the trusted source of the highest quality protein. And that's really our guiding light. So first and foremost, in all of the investments and activities that we're supporting at MLA, we want to know that we're going to be increasing productivity and prosperity for our producers in our industry as well. We've already made some substantial progress towards achieving our target. So every year the CSIRO do some calculations to come up with the annual emissions update. the last year of data that they did that for was for 2018. There's a little bit of a data lag, and so we'll be doing the 2019 analysis shortly. And we compared the data every year with our baseline year of 2005. So the last analysis that we did showed that between 2005 and 2018, we'd reduced our emissions by about 53%. As I said, we're looking at win-win activities here. So we don't think that we have to, that achieving our target is going to be at the expense of future productivity growth. We've also shown recently that Australian sheep meat production isn't causing additional temperature rise, and beef isn't far behind. And this is to do with the different behaviours of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And in the case of sheep meat, the emissions that are being produced by the sheep meat industry are being produced at a slower rate than what they are being removed from the atmosphere. And this means that sheep emissions are not causing additional temperature rises. And I'll talk about the last point in the next few slides, but we do have two strategic partnerships, the Emissions Avoidance Partnership and Carbon Storage Partnership, that we've developed up to try and bring to life the investments that we're making in these work areas. So on to the CN30 Roadmap. The CN30 Roadmap is available online. There might be some brochures available down there in Dubbo for you today. It's a great document. It outlines exactly what CN30 is, what the roles and responsibilities are for the various stakeholders, but really, perhaps most importantly, it provides these 4 key work areas, and they are our framework for the activities that we're supporting as part of CN30. So I'll go through each of those in the following slides as well, but briefly, the first one is industry leadership. So this is about building leadership capability and competency amongst all stakeholders that are involved in the industry. And then we've got our 2 sort of core R&D work areas. They are greenhouse gas emissions avoidance and carbon storage. And I'll talk about those in a little bit more detail shortly. And then the last work area is integrated management systems. And there's kind of 2 aspects to this one. So it's about bringing together the findings from the other work areas so that we can identify packages of recommended practices that producers can adopt across whole farms in ways that allow them to not only pursue a reduced emissions position, but also achieve other benefits. And those other benefits include demonstrated environmental stewardship, increased profitability, and increased animal productivity. And the other aspect that this work area is concerned with is working with governments and regulators to make sure we're providing the information that they need to build the frameworks that will enable our stakeholders from the red meat industry to track their emissions reductions and the improvements that they're making, and in ways that they're able to then be remunerated through different opportunities that are available in the market for reducing their net emissions position. So firstly, on to leadership building. Where we're really working hard with this one is we're working extremely closely between the CN30 program and the adoption program at MLA. We're really trying to embed adoption activities into all of the investments that we're making. So, for example, we're trying to, wherever possible, when we're researching things like additives, build in producer demonstration sites so that by the time we get to the end of the research, we've already got some producers demonstrating the challenges and benefits that they're seeing from having started to look at introducing some of these practices. We've also got a number of learning resources that we're trying to build. These include an EDGE package, so we're calling it Carbon Edge, and it'll be a 2 to 3 day workshop that sort of goes through getting involved in carbon and then starting to think about what types of practices might be appropriate for adoption on particular properties. I'll move on to emissions avoidance now. So in regards to emissions avoidance, we're working across grazing management, lot feeding and processing. My focus really is at the grazing management level, and we work with other teams at MLA to bring the other aspects in. Just a quick note on methane, and I'm sure most of you in the room are all over this methane story, but while methane is the main issue for us in terms of emissions from our production systems, it's also a potential opportunity. So when livestock consume feed, a lot of the energy from that feed is converted into live weight, but a fair bit is also lost as a byproduct, which is methane. So if we can instead redirect that feed energy that's being lost as methane into live weight gain, then there are some substantial benefits for productivity for our producers. And that's why we've got such a focus on these feed additives that I'm sure you've heard about already. So as I said, we're developing up an emissions avoidance partnership. We have executed some of the work that we're doing in this partnership already, but there's also a number of contracts that are sort of in various stages of the pipeline, and we hope to have them all sort of fully executed by the end of the financial year. And when I say partnership, what I mean is it's a consortium of investment partners, so people that are investing with us through our MLA donor company program, with the sort of aligned goal to bring profitable livestock methane mitigation technologies to market. And so I mentioned additives, and there's two that we consider to be closest to market and we're sort of focusing on at the moment. There may be others in the future, so we're exploring those as well, but just to mention these two, the first is called 3-NOP. It's a compound that was developed by a Danish company, and we recently showed in an MLA feedlot trial that it can reduce methane by up to 90%. What we're doing as part of the emissions avoidance partnership is doing some work with the CSIRO to determine whether we can feed 3-NOP to young calves in a way that it will have a long-term and permanent change to the rumen microbiome that's related to a long-term or even permanent reduction in methane production. So that's something that's been trialled on small numbers of animals, mainly dairy cattle overseas. And so we're looking at if this is a feasible way for us to have some substantial reductions in methane from our grazing herds in Northern Australia. We're also continuing to support work on Asparagopsis, and it's another additive that it's all over the news a lot of the time, so I'm sure you've heard about it, and it's been demonstrated to be able to reduce methane by more than 86% in feedlot cattle. We're also doing a lot of work in genetics, so some pretty large investments are in the pipeline to develop methane-related Australian sheep breeding values and estimated breeding values that will be incorporated into currently available genetic selection indices. And we're also doing work on legumes. So the tropical ones that I've mentioned here, Leukina and Desmanthus, are sort of pretty far along in their development pipeline. But we're also continuing to do work to bring some more southern legumes into the mix as well. And also looking at multi-species pastures. And the legumes and pastures can have direct impacts on reducing the production of methane, and they can also have indirect impacts and reduce methane emissions intensity by basically improving weight gains and enabling animals to get to sale weights faster so that they're out in the paddock producing methane for shorter periods of time. So on to carbon storage. So we also have our carbon storage partnership. The carbon storage partnership is up and running. So we've executed all of the investments in the middle of last year, and they're all sort of just over 6 months in at the moment. And we should be able to start presenting some results from some of that work in the near future. We're focused essentially on either carbon storage in soil or carbon storage in trees in this partnership. And with regards to soil, we're doing a couple of things. We're trying to develop some really robust remote sensing measures for being able to estimate and predict soil carbon. Currently, the costs of doing soil carbon baseline measurement are prohibitive, and we think that we are making the right investments to be able to develop technology that can reduce those costs to around $8 or even $3 per hectare. We're also using these technologies to explore whether certain practices can actually lead to increases in soil carbon. The practices that we're talking about here are time-controlled grazing, fertilising at depth, the use of legumes, and also transitioning from permanent cropping to permanent pastures. There has been a bit of inconsistent data in the past in Australia with regards to whether certain practices can result in increased soil carbon, and so we're trying to just make sure we're building some really robust data sets around this as well, so that farmers will be able to better predict what they might be able to achieve through implementing certain practices and reduce some of the risks around that. In regards to trees, we're looking at, in the south, we're looking at developing some decision tools to enable farmers to make some informed decisions about what species of trees, locations, densities, configurations that they can plant on their farms in ways that they'll have not only a carbon benefit, but also some productivity and profitability benefits through provision of shade and shelter for livestock. If that sounds exciting to you, the University of Melbourne team who are working on that project are currently conducting interviews with people in New South Wales. If you're planting trees or thinking about planting trees or have planted trees, then please reach out and I'll be able to pass your contact details on if you'd like to be involved in that work. In the north, we're also doing some work with trees as well, and specifically looking at how we can incorporate timber production into livestock production systems in ways that farmers can benefit from the additional income stream from the timber, but also so that the use of the timber production is done in such a way that it actually provides benefits for the livestock production systems as well. Okay, so the last work area, and I've already spoken a little bit about this one, so I won't go into too much more detail, but in regards to integrated management systems, then it sort of is underpinned by data, and one of the pieces of work that we're doing that's closely linked to the leadership building work area as well is really trying to build the resources and the training materials that we've got for producers to be able to get involved in carbon accounting. So carbon accounting is really the most important first step to getting involved in CN30 or in carbon in any way. It's a great benchmarking tool just for your business, regardless of whether your aim is to reduce your net emissions. Carbon is a really fundamental building block of what we're trying to grow when we're growing animals. And so by doing a carbon account, you can start to look at where you're seeing wastes of carbon and where you can build efficiencies of carbon into your system. And it's got other benefits beyond just being able to reduce your net emissions. Okay, so not sure how I'm going for time, but I'll just keep persevering through these ones, and I'll hope that Georgia can just type to me when it's nearly time, because I still don't know if I can hear. But we've recently developed our CN30 product catalogue. It's a work in progress, so we are planning to make hard copies of this and bring them to events such as meetups, but for now we're welcoming constructive feedback. So if you do go online to find this one and you see an improvement that we could make or have a question, then please reach out. So it's essentially a list of products and services producers can use today or in the near future to make productivity-led net emissions reduction, and it roughly reflects the 4 work areas of the CN30 roadmap. So just a few examples. We've got some links to our greenhouse gas accounting tools. We've got some links to some carbon storage management tools, and these aren't necessarily tools that MLA have developed, but we're trying to make this a really all-encompassing catalogue so that all of the available resources for red meat producers who are getting involved in carbon can access them. We've got some carbon neutral certification processes, some links to how you could get involved in some CN Ag training that we've currently got available, and also the Carbon Edge training that I spoke about that will be coming soon. Links to some of the sort of products and technologies, the on-farm practices that you can adopt. A lot of these are coming soon still, so the additives, we're looking at sort of a 2 to 3 years before we think that these might be getting widely used in the market. Some information about the EBVs and ASBVs that I've spoken about, and also some links to what you can implement in the way of renewable energy. So I'll finish with just a list of 10 things producers can do today. Firstly, it's important to arm yourself with the right knowledge. And so really, as I said earlier, the best way to do this is through doing a carbon account. A carbon account will let you identify your emission sources. It will help you understand what carbon storage options are available. And the other thing to do in this regard is to seek advice about what's going to be appropriate for you to consider adopting in your own production systems. We've got a very variable country out there, very variable livestock production systems and climates, and there's no silver bullet. So it's going to really depend on what you're trying to achieve and where you're located and what you're doing as to what practices are going to be suitable for you. The next step is to consider how you can manage your herd and flock differently, so that you can improve those rates of live weight gain and get animals off paddock in the most efficient way possible. And it's likely that most people are doing everything that they can to manage their herds and flocks as efficiently as possible already. So this is just about checking in and seeing if there are potential improvements that you could be making. The next thing is to consider energy efficiency or renewable energy technologies. If you're in certain environments, you could look at whether savanna fire management options are available to you to reduce the emissions that are linked with wildfires burning in really hot seasons. You can, the number 5 is to identify shade and shelter options. And then you can also be monitoring and recording your active dung beetle populations. And for number 7, while I've said that the new feed additives and supplements aren't available yet, if those are something that you would want to adopt in the future, then it's a really good time to start planning for how you're going to adopt them now. Do you need additional infrastructure, or do you need some different grazing management to be able to accommodate trying to use a new feed additive in your production system? You can also look at establishing deep-rooted, palatable pastures and legumes. Look at what mixes of pastures, legumes and trees are going to be suitable not only now, but in future weather and climate scenarios. And it's also, number 10 is a real moving feast at the moment. There are a number of different options that are emerging for producers to be able to be remunerated or achieve benefits through looking at reducing their net emissions. So it's a bit of a beast at the moment, the world of should I do a carbon project or enter a carbon neutral supply chain? Yeah, there are opportunities out there, but I think that those opportunities are emerging as well. So it's one of the ones to keep your eye on and to start to talk to people and make decisions about what you think might be best for your particular circumstances. Okay, so I think I might be finishing up a little bit earlier. That just leaves lots of time for questions. I've got a few take-home messages. Firstly, CN30 is an industry target and is a key success indicator of the red meat 2030 vision to double the value of red meat sales as the trusted source of the highest quality protein. The CN30 Roadmap provides the framework for how industry plans to achieve CN30, and producers can get involved now. And the sooner people get involved, the sooner they're likely to receive benefits. So I'll leave you with this list of tools and resources. There's a few here, and I will be able to make these slides available to you all after the meetup, and so these links will be available to you. But the CN30 team at MLA is growing. It's not going to be just myself and Doug McNichol now. We're going to have a few extras, including Penny Graham, who's there with you today. So if you have any questions or want any further information about anything you've heard about today, then please feel free to reach out to us. So thank you, and I welcome any questions. I hope that I can hear them.
So if there's any questions for Margaret, if you can just hold your hand up, there's one particular mic that will go around that she can then hear through that microphone. Just pop them right up.
One. Hello, Margaret, can you hear me?
I still can't quite hear, Georgia.
Is it soft or can you hear anything?
I can hear, yes, I can. It's just really soft.
Okay, how about...
Yeah, that's better.
That's better.
Yes, I hope you can hear me. I've got a question about the carbon account. I downloaded it and had a look at it. It seemed to be very complicated, and I was just wondering if there was going to be any training on that and help for producers.
Yeah, I think I caught that. So the question was about the carbon accounting process, and it is a little complicated, and so are we going to be looking at trying to make that more user-friendly for producers? And yes, we most definitely are. So at the moment we've got our carbon accounting technical manual, and it is very technical because it's actually a pretty complex area of work. So in the same way that you sort of look to a lawyer to get legal advice, then it is one of those things that not every producer out there is going to be able to pick up the skill set to be able to just go through and do their carbon account. However, we are really trying to make some resources available that make this a bit easier for producers. So a couple of things. We do have some ag training that's designed at sort of the advisor consultant level rather than producers themselves, but producers themselves are more than welcome to make some inquiries, and we'll see if we can sign you up to do that training. It's a 1.5 day workshop that sort of goes through all of the basics of what greenhouse gases in the context of livestock systems are and why we're concerned about them, as well as going through the carbon accounting training. We are also in the process of developing some e-learning materials that will be a kind of a bit of a simpler, quick and dirty taster of doing a carbon account rather than going in and doing the full-blown sort of spreadsheet system that we've got. So we're hoping that e-learning module will be ready in the near future. So looking at sort of a quick turnaround of that, and hoping that it might be available towards the middle of the year. Yeah, if you are interested in the other training, then as I said, please reach out to myself and Penny and the CN30 team in general to make inquiries, and we can get back to you about it.
Another question. Thank you, Margaret. This question is really about just talking about either selling carbon credits or being carbon neutral, and just elaborating a little bit on double dipping, I suppose.
Okay, so I think I got the question. Feel free to call out if I missed any of it, but I think it was about how to go about thinking about whether to sell carbon credits as part of an emissions reduction fund project versus holding on to credits so that you can use them to offset your own emissions and have a carbon neutral farm or product. Look, it's one of those decisions that producers will, you know, need to make themselves based on what they think is going to have the best return on investment or be best for their business or fit what goals they're trying to achieve. If we would like to get to a position where we've got some really good options for producers to be able to keep their credits and be able to use them to offset their own emissions. So this is sort of, there's a concept called insetting that can work sort of along supply chains where, you know, one part of the supply chain who has got capacity to build carbon in the landscape can sort of offset some of the emissions that are generated from the production side of things. As I said earlier, these things are emerging at the moment. So there are a couple of sort of small startups who are starting to get involved in this space. MLA have invested in a company called Sustained Cert, who are the Australian arm of Gold Standard, who are really internationally recognised and a very well reputed organisation that provides standards and certifications. But it is emerging at the moment, so understand that it's can be a little bit frustrating navigating through that space. Happy to talk further on it. The option with the ERF at the moment is obviously extremely appealing. The carbon price has just gone gangbusters recently. I think it went from $16 midway through last year, and now it's well above 50. If a carbon project makes sense for you and you've you know, talked to the right people and gotten the right advice, then I think that, you know, that's a really good option. It is the most readily available incentive for producers who are kind of getting involved in new practices now. There is a trade-off that if you sell your credits outside of your system, they are technically no longer yours, and you can't use them then to offset your own emissions and get a carbon neutral brand. So it's all things to think about as you're navigating those decisions. I hope that helped in some way. I know it was a very long-winded answer.
Are there any more questions for Margaret today?
I'm sorry, I can't hear at all anymore.
That's okay. Can you hear me, Margaret?
Maybe Georgia could type the question.
Can I borrow the mic? Can you hear me now, Margaret?
A little bit, yeah, I could hear you a little bit now.
I've just swapped mics. I've
got
a quick question for you. The additives that you mentioned before, and you said they've shown to be effective in feedlots. I just wondered how you plan to use them in grazing systems.
That's a great question. Thanks, Georgia. Yeah, so within the Emissions Avoidance Partnership, this is a huge focus for us as well. We work, and they're sort of the first pass of testing out these additives that we're interested in. But the big wins aren't going to be made in feedlots. They only make up a very small proportion of our total industry emissions. So we really need to get a solution for grazing systems. And we're looking at a number of potential delivery mechanisms to feed these additives to grazing animals. One of them is looking at how we can get to forms of these additives that are going to be stable and soluble in reticulated water, and we're working with a company who does sort of remote dosing of reticulated water supply for pharmacological purposes. We're also looking at sort of a slow release capsule that can be inserted into the rumen and deliver consistent dosages of the additive over a time, and we're hoping to get that up to sort of between 6 months and a year period that it can release the additive for, and looking at technologies that will be completely biodegradable so that there's not going to be any issues caused at the processing end of things in regards to having any residues from these things remaining in the animal. And we're also looking at lick blocks. So lick blocks are a little bit tried and true, and they have their challenges as well, but we do have some investments that we're trying to get contracted at the moment that are looking at how we can optimize lick blocks to be able to deliver the right dosages of animals in a range of different environments.
Perfect, thank you. I've got one last question, which was, what can a producer in the region here do first if they want to get involved in carbon neutrality?
Okay, thanks, Georgia. That's a great question as well. And as I said, the absolute best thing producers can do is a carbon account. So if that's of interest and you're wanting to get some ideas of what the best step is to start to do a carbon account, then reach out to Penny or I or the CN30 team. We do have some resources available online, but generally what we're finding is that it does require some training to do it to the level of detail that's going to be required to really help producers make some decisions.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. If there are... yeah, we've got one more question here.
Yeah, I just had a question regarding the footprint of a retail product on the way there. It's vastly different, say we're in central West New South Wales where we are now, and you've got homebred lambs that can get processed locally and then go to a local retail outlet, compared to, for example, someone in central West New South Wales who's bought scanned in sheep from Western Australia over to central West New South Wales. They've fed it on grain they've bought in Victoria and then sent them back down to South Australia to get processed. Like, it's a very different carbon footprint by the time that product's got on the shelf, and it's all not really related to exactly what you're doing on your own farm. But is that something that'll be accounted for, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was nice that I could hear you really loud and clear that time. So the mic's working now. Look, there are going to be really different footprints, and when we're looking at a carbon neutral product, we do need to take into account all of the aspects or scopes of the production system and transport that has gone into getting that product to where it is. So at the end of the day, when you sort of do a carbon account, or if you're doing going down the line of a carbon neutral product, you would sort of get a consultant to come in, like, probably, and help you do a life cycle assessment, which is sort of a much greater detail version of a carbon account. And to get a carbon neutral product for something that has a higher footprint, it would require that there was a higher volume of offsets generated to be able to cancel out the emissions that were produced in the system.
Hi, Margaret. I hope you can hear me.
I can.
My question, just I think the feed additives are very promising. I've got a sister-in-law that's involved in the space, and I think it'll be a good thing when they come through. As an agronomist, I'm constantly amazed at the lack of extension in regard to building soil carbon. Soil fertility correction is almost never mentioned. Is that something we should be extending with this whole program? Because it's been shown for over 30 years that correcting, phosphorus deficiency can drastically improve organic carbon.
Yeah, I think that all work that's going into soil carbon is really, really important. So, we recognise that soil carbon is being flagged as one of the biggest opportunities in this space, and we're land custodians of a huge amount of area. So we want to understand what the volumes of soil carbon are that we can build in response to any type of practice change. So that would include looking at different fertiliser and phosphorus regimes. I guess what we're trying to do at the moment is making sure that we're building the science that underpins it, so that we end up at the end of the day with a product that we can be sure does actually have carbon built in the soil, and we can sort of demonstrate that because we've got the science to underpin it. So I mentioned that we're looking at a few particular practices and trying to build the data sets to underpin the soil carbon responses of doing those practices. And that's just because those practices were opportunistically available with the partners that we were doing that research work with. So it doesn't exclude any other practice that might have similar impacts. So we're definitely interested in continuing to broaden the scope of activities that might have a positive influence on soil carbon.
Thank you, Margaret. I think that's all we've got time for at the moment. So we'll say goodbye to Margaret now, but I will make mention that the CN30 Roadmap brochures that Margaret referred to are at the MLA trade table at the back there. So if you are interested, go and grab a couple. Round of applause for Margaret, please.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Sorry, I think we're